Tonight, the Biden administration is feeling the weight of its decisions. Some lawmakers are not shy about their disapproval of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Joining us to discuss the response from Capitol Hill is Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss from Massachusetts. He's an Afghanistan vet from the Marines, and his district includes the Boston suburbs of Newton and Brookline. Congressman Auchincloss, welcome to the program.
Good evening.
What are your thoughts, just as a veteran, on what's happened in Afghanistan? I have military in my family. My father served in Vietnam. I have a cousin who served in Afghanistan. And so I can only kind of imagine what's on their mind tonight, looking at what's happening. But what's on your mind?
One of the first lessons you learn in officer training is that leadership can be lonely. And there are no decisions that can be more isolating, I imagine, as commander-in-chief than ones regarding the military and U.S. foreign policy. And this president is experiencing that tonight. But he's making a high-integrity decision. And that is more important now than ever. After 4 years of lies and depredations under Donald Trump, this president has had the moral fiber to look at the situation for what it is and to have a hard conversation with the American people and with the Afghan government about the stark reality that we cannot win a counterinsurgency without a viable political partner in Kabul, which did not exist.
Elaborate on that a little bit in terms of not having a viable political partner. It sounds like you're saying there was kind of no way for us to continue to make advances there on the ground if the Afghan government wasn't strong enough to buoy that effort.
We could spend a century in Afghanistan. We could win every battle against the Taliban, and the United States armed forces, its infantry with its close air support, could outmaneuver and outfirepower the Taliban every time. And yet we would still lose the war, because ultimately counterinsurgency is a struggle for a nation's soul, and only the people of the nation and its leadership can derive the willpower to win that struggle. This has been clear ever since the Bush administration. Afghanistan, recall, began as a counterterrorism mission to deny safe harbor to terrorists and to bring to justice those who architected 9/11. The counterterrorism mission has been largely successful in Central Asia. Osama bin Laden is dead, and for 2 decades, no terrorists have been able to use that terrain to plan attacks against the U.S. homeland. But under Rumsfeld and Cheney, it morphed into this staggering counterinsurgency nation-building effort. And yet, over the course of 20 years, despite trillions of dollars and innumerable time and treasure poured in, the Afghan central government was unable to actually nation build. Instead, they fell into corruption and incompetence. We had no partner there.
I can, though, understand how this can feel like a shock to the system to some Americans. I mean, if there's one thing that represents America in the minds of many Americans, it's the U.S. Armed Forces. And I think we believe that when we put boots on the ground around the world, that we're fighting for American values. We're fighting for something. We are a nation that was born of a fight for the kinds of liberties and freedoms that we were trying to extend to the Afghan people. What is your sense of just what this says to Americans about who America is right now?
I want to be clear about one thing first and foremost. The United States military served honorably and valiantly for 20 years in Afghanistan. They were given a counterterrorism mission, which they executed successfully, and they were given a counterinsurgency mission, which they executed honorably and with great diligence, but was ultimately doomed to fail because a counterinsurgency mission must have a political solution. And the anger and the frustration for that failure should be directed to 2 places. One, to the U.S. national security establishment, who for 20 years in countless situation room meetings knew that this result was inevitable and yet did not have the courage to tell that to the American people until this president. And 2, to the leadership in Kabul, who had a once in a generation opportunity to truly architect a new state for the people and instead line their own pockets. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask you in terms of what happens now about some of the political response to this. I hear you in terms of the lack of a political road forward in Afghanistan. I wonder what the political path forward looks like in Washington. We've heard from a number of Republicans today, including Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. He said that this was, in his words, the result of a short-sighted, weak, and utter failure of both the previous White House and the current administration. We also heard from Congresswoman Liz Cheney of Wyoming, who is a member of the Armed Services Committee. Here's part of what she said today.
There is no question that President Trump, his administration, Secretary Pompeo, they also bear very significant responsibility for this. President Trump told us that the Taliban was going to fight terror. Secretary Pompeo told us that the Taliban was going to renounce al-Qaeda. None of that has happened. None of it has happened.
So, Congressman, it sounds like, at least from their perspectives, there's enough blame to go around across the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, the Republican Party lecturing the United States on Afghan foreign policy is ironic, to say the least. This is the party of George W. Bush that took a counterterrorism mission that was tightly scoped and successful and allowed it to mutate into a never-ending counterinsurgency mission while waging a war of choice that also failed in Iraq. This is the party of Donald Trump that turned their backs on the Kurds and allowed them to be massacred. This party has no credibility on Middle East or Central Asian foreign policy. This president was left with a series of bad options, and he made the tough decision. He made the necessary decision to not pass on this failed forever war to the next administration.
Well, what does this administration do now, particularly with the fate of Afghans who are waiting on visas for Afghan women and girls? House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said in a statement today that she's deeply concerned for the treatment of women and girls under Taliban rule. They have been brutal and monstrous, to say the least, in the way they've treated women in Afghanistan. What would you like to see the administration do right now?
Well, first and foremost, the administration needs to continue to secure American personnel in country right now. Number two, it's got to continue to work with NGOs to evacuate Afghan allies. Number three, it has to persist a counterterrorism capability in Afghanistan, turn that into an over-the-horizon capability so that we can neutralize any terrorists who have imminent capability to strike the U.S. homeland. And then finally, the country needs to use the full freight of its economic, diplomatic, and humanitarian leverage with the next government of Afghanistan to try to secure as best as possible hard-won gains for civil society, for a free press, and for the empowerment of women and girls, especially in the capital region.
Before I let you go, you mentioned using our leverage to try to mitigate the situation as best we can. If I was a Taliban fighter right now, I wouldn't give a damn what the U.S. thinks of me. You beat us down. We made it all the way back, took every provincial capital on the way into Kabul. We have won. Before I let you go, Congressman, what leverage does the United States have over the Taliban at all right now?
That situation is fluid, and I think the point of diplomacy is to figure out where there are interests that can be mutually met. But the Taliban is going to be seeking, as all new regimes do, some measure of international credibility, some amount of economic humanitarian aid. And the United States needs to be looking at the full suite of its options and the full suite of its leverage. I mean, we have a significant footprint and expertise in this country and a significant investment in it that we can bring to bear to see if we can try to protect the hard-won gains in civil society in the Kabul region, in particular, or the Kandahar and the second cities as well.
Massachusetts Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss, sir, appreciate you making time. Thank you very much.